So this, I guess, is our second sort of this, I guess, is our second sort of formal meeting as an incipient working group or a bunch of people from a bunch of towns who are interested in stuff being supported by people from a much wider state perspective. Although this began back in the spring with a little informal session at the Marlborough Conservation Commission meeting where a bunch of other folks from towns between Massachusetts and the Green Mountain National Forest, we have this important wildlife linkage, came together to start talking about this. And Monica has been a principal point person supporting this process as a state community wildlife biologist and helping make these meetings happen and give us a lot of resources that we haven't been able to tap into otherwise, including this new possibility of a substantive grant that could be explored to fund this as a 2-year project, which could mean that this working group could turn into a sort of steering committee. And that's sort of one of the emphases of tonight's meeting is, do we want to look into this? And if so, how do we want to approach it? 2 others is just like who we are and what our intents in this group are and what our principal goals are. I know also hearing from a woman who's involved in conservation planning sort of throughout Massachusetts, principally in Western Mass, immediately south of our corner of Vermont. She thinks one thing that would really help with this grant process, and this may be something that other people have something to say about too, is a mission statement. And that aspect, maybe not to refine a mission statement, but to start looking in that direction in terms of our goal could be relevant as well, whether or not we apply for the grant. And then how we want to move forward, potentially inclusive of the grant, but in a much broader perspective, what are our principal intentions to explore together. And then to sort of settle in, Patty, do you want to take us through a little brief introduction? Yeah.
Too fun?
Yeah. Yes, too fun.
Already. For those of you who were here last time, Monica pointed out that conservation work should include fun. And to that end, would you like a map? I would like a map.
Okay, let me see what I can pull out. I think what I have is what we were looking at last time. Maybe the broader region. Will this work? Maybe not ideal, but it's a map.
Oh, I think it will work.
Okay.
We're close enough. Can you actually zoom in on, well, let's see, who's farthest north?
Anybody who's not represented in this area.
Yeah.
That's good. Does that work?
Very
Okay.
good.
Unless someone from Jamaica is here.
Anyone from Jamaica?
Okay.
So we might actually need, can we edit this map?
How would you like it edited? Maybe.
Can you put emojis on it?
Emojis.
We could project it.
I could
Would place
put,
marks suffice?
Oh, that's a good idea. We can project it onto this sheet of paper.
Brilliant. I like that.
So I thought of this activity just because I love maps and I love looking at places. And that's, of course, why we're all here. We all feel some attachment to the wild lands in this region. So I thought it might be fun just to share with each other maybe our favorite wild place in this area. We'll put a little heart on the map, or you can put your own heart, or whatever symbol you feel best evokes how you feel about your favorite place. And I know it's so hard to choose, right? So just a favorite place. It doesn't have to be the favorite place. So I can start, but it will be hard to choose. So I'm just gonna put a little heart right here in what feels like my living room, which is, let's see, make sure I do this right. Where am I actually? There's a lot of water here. There's a lot of water.
So South Road College also.
Yeah, that's kind of what I thought. What's that
It
thing?
shows the old Untitled
Oh, okay.
Chapter.
Well, it's right there then.
Yeah.
This big wild place right here. That's a apartment, and I spend a lot of time out in these woods with especially beavers and porcupines. I've seen a lot of changes there over the years. There used to be a lot of moose, now there are a lot of deer.
Are you going up the replacement? Yeah.
Oh, I just threw it right on the screen.
But yeah, we're gonna go up and
I wonder for those who don't know everybody, if we could also say our
Yeah.
names and where we're from at
Yeah.
the same time.
I'm Patty, I'm from right there.
Patty is both one of our planning commissioners and one of our select board members in Marlboro, as well as many hats in environment and
Well, I've got the blue marker. I'm Emily Davis, for those who don't know me. I'm the Natural Resources and Water Quality Planner at the Windham Regional Commission, and I'm very excited to be here. And I'm kind of tempted to put my backyard too, which is actually unique. Yeah. So I guess we're right here, right? Yeah. Yeah, that's my favorite wild place. I'm fortunate enough to share a property boundary with the Bonneville Environmental Education Center, and it's just a place that, by virtue of living next to it, I've come to just love so much.
Okay. So I'm Jack Witness. I'm with the Hogback Mountain Conservation Association. There's a lot of places I love and like. It's going to be hard to pick just one. Can't have two?
You can.
Okay. Well, I live in one of these greener areas, light green area, which are more an issue. So I live right on the lake, so Lake Raponda, so I'm seeing wildlife all the time. I live there year round. It was pretty neat when the snow geese flew by and landed on the ice last winter. We have mink. One got in my kayak this year and spent a little time one evening. Otters we've seen. I mean, a deer swimming across the river, the lake. Anyhow, it's a really a nice place, and the light green indicates that it's not the highest priority, but it is still on this. The other area that I really like, I like to fish, so this whole, I'm just going to draw sort of a line, Somerset, and the Deerfield River in there, which is a really important area, and that fortunately is dark green at the moment.
I'm Jamie Tanner. I'm also on the Marlboro Conservation Commission. And is this South Road here? Yeah. I'm actually not going to put my house, although my house is right there. I'm going to put close to Pat's house on the Marlboro College campus. Which I try to get out on with my students. I teach at the college also. Try to have a lot of my classes out in the woods around the college.
Thank you. I'm Donna Sebastian. I'm on the Wardsboro Planning Commission. And I have many favorite places outdoors, so I'm going to stick with the one I spend the most time at, my home. About here.
What do you like about that?
I'm Bill Jewell. I'm on the Guilford Conservation Commission, and I spend a lot of, my feet don't work much anymore, so I don't hike. Although, if I do hike, I often go to Governor's Mountain, which is probably right there. And then I have the place right here, which is very good. And I kayak a lot, so all the Connecticut River down to Connecticut and up to Bradford, I travel a lot on. Also kayak in Somerset and what I'm Whitingham, I forget what the name of what they call it these days, but and South Pond.
Harriman Reservoir.
The Harriman, right. Well, it has two names. And then Sweet Pond, which is not a pond.
I'm not sure I can use your blue marker. So my name is Lisa Salzville, and I'm with Vermont Coverts Woodlands for Wildlife. We're a statewide nonprofit that primarily with education on landowners about how to manage their forest land for wildlife, and it's a peer-to-peer network so that they're educating their neighbors and friends. That's the objective. If I was to put a dot up there, my dots are kind of off your map a little bit. My husband's from Bennington, and so we're a lot of times up in the Green Mountain National Forest on that side of Route 9. But I've heard about fishing derbies in Lake Harriman and fishing in Somerset from his growing up. And also, I don't know if it's actually on the map, but Jamaica State Park, I think, is a wonderful state park. And so if it's on that, that's where I would put my dot.
Oh, it might be.
Yeah.
So you all direct me to where to. I haven't been there for years, but I loved it when I was there.
Jamaica.
So where would the state park be? Ballpark?
Keep going north, top, yep, over there.
There we go.
So I'm Carol Hasselbeck. I'm the town clerk in Newfane, and I'm on the Conservation Commission. My favorite outdoor spot around here is in the Newfane Town Forest, and I've been sitting there trying to figure out where the heck it is. And I think it's got to be somewhere around here.
Oh, actually, the Vernon Town Forest is one of my favorite places too.
Yeah.
So it's got to be somewhere.
Yeah, that's what it's called.
Yeah.
And it moved, but
Yeah.
general area. Over the Dummerston line, and then along the Rock River, and then across the street from it.
Donna, do you want to speak some of the experiences or aspects of the place that you're connected to at home?
Well, it is a little more mountainous than some areas, and we are seeing wildlife pretty much daily. We've had in the past moose, as well as deer and black bear coming through, and bobcat, and all sorts of birds of prey and other birds. We have some meadows around our property and forest everywhere around that. And it's just a wonderful place to be.
Awesome. Cool. Thank you.
Yeah, and lots of places to hike.
Yeah.
Awesome. I love to do.
Nice. Well, in some ways I would second Patty that the wildlands in the very upper part of the Green River watershed toward the center of Marlborough is pretty much the wildest spot in town, and it's a place I've gotten to know really well. And I like to keep up with the goings on, where there are still some moose once in a while that come back and that sort of thing. I think what I'm actually going to do is say that Route 9, right by Marlborough Collision and Towing, right by Hamilton Road there, that's the one spot last winter I was out, I don't know, a dozen, probably 20 days, monitoring wildlife road crossings around town, covering some part of town during suitable tracking conditions, which we finally had some of last winter. And the one place where I found a bobcat crossing was on Route 9, right there. It's a spot that has never previously been considered as important for wildlife. There are also 3 fisher crossings right there. So it actually stands out as pretty significant. And I was really thrilled to see that, even though it's steep topography and there's a guardrail and a lot of traffic around a blind curve, and a nearby road paralleling the state highway. But I'm just thrilled that there's still wildlife movement there. And maybe I'll also add the most outstanding wildlife road crossing in town, across Route 9. More than half the crossings across Route 9 happen there, and the critical crossing that feeds into it.
Where is that other one?
By Town Hill Road, near the town office. Sorry, the town road crew facility. Between that and the wetland, and top of Town Hill Road to approach it. Pass this to Monica, and then I'll stand in the background when she starts facilitating her next things, and I'll just draw the town borders in, so the parts on the paper may have some meaning later.
Great. So I'm Monica Brisbane-Hart from the Vermont Fish and Wildlife Department. And like Lisa, this is not the area of Vermont that I know the best. But the place I'm going to say, I actually, one of the first dates I went on with my husband, the person who's now my husband, was at Black Mountain in Palmerston.
Oh, yeah.
Which is it must be, it's right along the river, is that it? Somewhere right in there?
Right on.
So I will put my heart there. But I'll also say while I'm up here, I love this activity because you can really see all of these hearts, all of these stories from around the region. It's kind of neat to see the connectivity linkage that is linking them together in many ways. But I also just want to point out the danger of some of these maps where this wasn't intended for this activity. It's intended to show potentially the best habitat for connecting wildlife. And yet I heard a few, like it's not as good or it's better. And what the wonderful thing is about our stories is that we get to make them up ourselves. We get to decide our own priorities. What's better or worse for wildlife may not be what's better or worse for other things or other stories. And as a community, this is where we get to decide those other priorities for whatever reasons are important here.
And I think I should mention I'm Ashley, and I'm on the Conservation Commission in Baldwin as well.
Sounds good. Do you want to say anything else before I move along?
Yeah.
Did you want to draw some
I'll
boundaries?
do that with
okay.
At some point, I want to do maybe a little history of this connectedness thing that I've been involved with, and maybe a little bit of a rant.
Absolutely. Does this sound like...
Whatever you have time for.
Sounds good. I'm not sure what the content is, so I'm not sure when the appropriate time is. But, should we save it for later, or do you want to
I can do
say
it
a few
now.
words now?
Actually, as a landscape architect and land planner, undergraduate at Penn State in the late 60s, connectiveness was one of the things that we had people come and talk to us about. Mm-hmm. I mean, it was in a larger context, and it wasn't quite called connectiveness. It had to do with qualities of rating how different parts of the thing work for different kind of things. They had a whole range of critters, they had a whole range of forests, they had a whole range of other things, but all about how all of it worked together. There was a guy named Roberts in Minnesota, or Madison, Wisconsin, who came and talked to us, and then Ian McCard came and talked to us while he was writing the book, Design with Nature. So I kind of got, one of the things I looked at way back then was this connectivity and how to maintain it and so on. My first job was in York, Pennsylvania, which is the center of Pennsylvania. I worked with planning commissions, and one of the things was I did the McCard-Roberts thing about how wildlife and trees and stuff were important and had them added to their town plan. And then Sometime we moved to Philadelphia, McCarg was there, so I got to be in his office while he was doing all of that stuff, putting it all together. We had lots of conversations with him and Narendra Jr., who actually wrote the book, Design with Nature. And there were all these discussions about these same things. And then I decided to come to Vermont, and I had found out that McCarg had already been to Vermont. Act 250, he was a big part of why Act 250 is what it was. One of the things that he did right away was the 10-acre lot. He wanted to make sure that there were large parcels of land that would partly keep this connectivity thing going and not break up big chunks of land into smaller chunks. That 10-acre lot he was successful in. The other part was he was going to make a map of the whole state based on some of those things that Roberts had done about what's the most critical areas. He gave numbers to all that, and he started a big statewide map. I worked with Windham Regional to get them started on doing the Windham Regional area down in Vernon, and then that went away. The 10-acre lot didn't work, and I really hadn't heard anybody talk about connectivity until just recently. So my rant kind of is that the follow through on this stuff has been really awful. It's been terrible, and the stuff they actually got enacted, I mean, the things I did in New York and Lancaster County in Pennsylvania, that went away as soon as I went away. It was like, none of that stuff stuck. So the statewide map never got approved, period. So I'm not totally on board with what you guys are trying to do, because in some ways I think it's doomed. It's not going to happen because there's too many people with my land is my land kind of thing. And those kind of people tend to get rid of stuff like connectivity and worried about other people's land pretty quick.
I think that's a valuable perspective to add to this conversation that we're going to have about how to move forward as a region and as a group. And so thank you for that background and that perspective. And I think we will need to keep that in mind. All right, and with that, let me just frame kind of this evening for us. When I was here, a month ago or so, with most of you, not all of you, but most of you, I think the direction of this group, the direction in the room was, okay, we have our working group. Let's convene and figure out who we are, what our main goals are, and how to move forward. Since that time, and this has been alluded to, there's been this grant opportunity that came up. And I'd just like to get everybody on the same page about what this grant opportunity is. There have been many different discussions, I think, about different aspects of it. But let me share this grant opportunity, and then we can decide as a group how to move forward, whether that's what is worth pursuing, and there is a deadline behind that could kind of drive what this group becomes, or whether we want to take this conversation back into that direction of who are we as a group, who is this group, and how do you all want to move forward. I should clarify too, I keep using that word we. I'm really here tonight as a facilitator. I see this as a regional group. You all were the ones who got together. I think I tend towards the we because I really want to be included, but my role here is really as the facilitator who can come in and provide assistance as needed. But I really see it more as your group. So please also let yourselves be the drivers of the conversation as well. I'm happy to facilitate, but let me know if something else is more helpful. So let me start by just going through this grant. I have a couple of slides that will kind of summarize it. Just like any grant, there are a lot of words involved in the actual grant itself. I have a couple copies printed out. if anybody wants to look through it. But it's through an organization called the High Meadows Fund. I know Emily has some pretty intimate knowledge of this group. Lisa has some knowledge of this group as well. They have funded numerous different initiatives, but there's a new initiative, or a new focus of the grant that has come out recently called Improving Forest Ecosystem Health and Integrity. And when I read this, shortly after that last meeting, I thought, wow, this sounds like exactly what this group is doing. And then talking to Ashley, he said, yeah, this sounds like exactly what this group is doing. And this is what I learned. Oops, hold on a second. So it's called the Improving Forest Ecosystem Health and Integrity. It's due November 15th, so almost exactly a month, which is not a lot of time. So we would have to really move forward. The amount is, if it's a one-year proposal, it would need to not exceed $20,000 or $50,000 for, they call it a multi-year. It's basically 2 or maybe a little bit more than 2 years by the time that time frame would get done. These are some of the things that stood out. Our goal is to foster collaborative approaches to creating resilient, adaptable, healthy forests. We hope to galvanize efforts to improve connectivity among forest parcels. These are just brief little snippets of what it says. It's much longer. But especially projects that draw participants with varied interests, such as forest landowners, town officials, scientists, and wildlife and outdoor recreation enthusiasts. And here's their statement. What the Northern Forest needs now is redoubled effort to protect large tracts of land from the quiet threat of fragmentation. It's really what this grant is about. And going on, they say, what does the success look like to High Meadows? Now, normally I don't like to have slideshows with this many words on them, but it's hard to get past that for a grant proposal. Protecting, reestablishing wildlife corridors and habitat to reduce fragmentation. That's their first thing that they list. It sounds exactly like what this group was looking for. Encourage biodiversity and reduce invasive species, promote appreciation for the components of the forest, maintain and improve a forest's ability to withstand or adapt to climate change, lead to actions that demonstrate a community's commitment to the integrity of the forest landscape. So, sounded pretty good. Now, there's a lot of words again in this. I'm going to just highlight a few so that we can just get the general idea here. So this is what they say they would value in a proposal. Connectivity, collaboration, community involvement, things supporting the forest economy, thinking about how our forest, or how the forest economy of this region is related to the community itself. Outreach for forest awareness, to improve forest health or connectivity, and allowing or encouraging forest landowners to see their role in the bigger picture. That's how I'm going to sum up this whole page. And I'll do the same. So they're examples of what High Meadows could be inclined to support. I'll just highlight a few that stood out to me as appropriate here. Landowner initiatives, collaboration and outreach, mapping and planning work, and this community organizing and visioning, and their details include town planning or bylaws, that type of thing. So thinking about this in the context of this connectivity picture that this group was thinking of, it sounds like there could be some potential. And before we move on, I wanted to let you all have a little bit of room for discussion. Maybe a good place to start with that is there are some organizations here in the room who might be in a good place to kind of be the leaders. There's more than one organization here that might take a role. And I wanted to maybe turn it over to Emily and Lisa and maybe Patty if you have other things to add from a Bonnievale's perspective, and then we can have more of a discussion. Okay. Emily, do you want to add a few words?
Yeah, I do. I guess, we had the Windham Regional Commission, and I think there was a small group of us who kind of spoke just a couple minutes before this meeting. Sorry, I'm repeating myself a little bit. But we're really interested in this grant opportunity, and we would like to go for it. And that's to support, again, it's regional conservation work, which frankly, and a little bit of a glimpse into our organization, has been something that has been a priority of I think, let me do the math really quick, a third of our staff members for quite a long time, and it's just the nature of the way that regional planning commissions are funded in Vermont that we aren't always funded to do the work that we really, really want to do. So when we do sense that there is some funding available to do that passion work, we're just like, oh yeah, finally. And two, you know, being a regional planning commission, we have been invited to these tables of these projects for so long, and we've just kind of felt frustrated that we're not necessarily in a position to provide the leadership or the administrative role that we could because of just limitations, of just resource limitations, frankly. I mean, it's just sort of the way things are. So that's not the only reason why we're interested, but it's a very honest one. So again, just for that transparency there. Two, I think that our regional plan is really lacking. We do have certainly ecological layers and that ecological lens, and we have, you know, bear corridor habitat and different wildlife and habitat connectivity in our regional plan, but it's not, is it super A+ awesome great? No, it's not. And again, a lot of our staff recognize that and really feel like we're going to be updating our regional plan within the next 2 years. We just started to go through what we have existing and are flagging what needs to be updated. And consistently, the thing that comes up is land use and habitat connectivity, specifically those Act 171 layers. So we're already moving towards developing some kind of conservation plan. And so we see that, and you know, we can tap into some core funding for that, but we see this as an opportunity for it to be synergistic with this kind of work, thinking about regional connectivity and forest fragmentation and such. So that's another thing that we're seeing. And then again, we also see that there's this other group, which we kind of feel like is sort of the sister group of you all, which is, I think, an effort that's led by the Dummerston Conservation Commission. But they haven't really, it feels like they're in a similar place. We met, Patty was at that table, met back in mid-August, and the group had landed on some preliminary goals. And I think a key difference there was that this group was talking about who we decided on conservation and landscape level conservation, specifically with the idea about climate change adaptation. So looking at what are those landscape, the parcels or the landscape areas that provide a lot of diversity so that it might help us as a region help mitigate and adapt to climate change and provide climate refuge for species. So it's a little bit, I mean, it's two sides of the same coin, but a little bit of a different flavor. And I think, you know, I think those goals had yet to be further defined and a geographic area had yet to be defined, but it looks like it was shaping up to be closer to the Connecticut River and along the West River Valley. So, so we see that, we see this, we have our plan, we have other groups, and that's kind of where we're just sort of like trying to make sense of the pieces. So, again, you know, I can represent the Windham Regional Commission and say that we're really interested. We know that there's a lot of support that should be given here, and we're really excited and happy that we can potentially in a place to give this work the support that it really warrants. And I'm kind of eager, I'm eager to hear more, and I'm eager to just sort of listen and kind of mull over how all these pieces might be integrated into a cohesive proposal that makes sense for everybody and for all the project goals.
So I have a couple of questions. How often do grants like this come down the road? Is this once in a lifetime? Is this every other year? Is this a recurrent grant possibility?
It's not something that we should depend on, but there are others, there might be potentially similar funding mechanisms. We see organizations like the High Meadows Fund as being a really nice grantee because the money that they give, oftentimes their reporting requirements are much easier to work with than, say, like a federal or a state agency, because it is through the Vermont Community Foundation, private sector foundation money. It's kind of just a little bit nicer to work with on a, you know, kind of reporting administrative level. So we love the High Meadows Fund for that reason and others. And they also tend to be a little bit more groovy and hip. So you can propose interesting and innovative ideas, and they're going to be fairly willing to fund
But
them.
my question was, does this come every year, every 2 years? This is a one-time thing?
Hence, my answer was, this is a new funding opportunity from the High Meadows Fund. My point is that while there might be other grant funds available from other organizations that fund things like forest connectivity, this group is offering this now, I think, in a somewhat, correct me if I'm wrong, Monica, but it feels like they're experimenting with this. And that's fairly typical of the High Meadows Fund, is that they'll release a program and sort of run it for a year or two and see how it goes. They may choose to run it again or not. So it's not something that we can necessarily depend on.
This is the first time they've offered this one, and the future is in question. It could be that they'll run it again and there would be another opportunity, but we don't know.
And my other question is, with all of the things that you listed that they're interested in, do applicants apply with the thought that, well, we need to address all of these, or can you pick a couple?
No.
How does that fit in?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think you could address any of them. I think what they're really looking for is a partnership, I think. And so I think they would like to see multiple aspects of that picture addressed. But it really depends on who applies and what those proposals are. I think there are, and I will share that there are many groups that I think will be applying for this. This will be competitive. And every one of those projects is looking at a slightly different aspect. So it really comes down to what appeals to the High Meadows Fund. Often in grant proposals like this, the more partners you bring in and the more facets, the more different, the wider the scope. As long as it all pulls together into a cohesive project, I think those are likely to be funded. Those kind of rise to the top. But it really depends on every single proposal.
And I'll also add, your question kind of, it brings another point. I think it's tempting when you're developing a project. Projects are kind of chicken and an egg, right? You can kind of think and talk and mull it over, and then all of a sudden when a funding opportunity arises, it gets real, and you're motivated to really develop that and to figure out what that proposal is going to look like. But I would caution against, we see frequently that it's kind of like, you have a project, you have an idea, and sometimes, people chase money, it's natural. Our projects we need funding to do the work that we want to do, but all of a sudden, some money's around and everyone kind of swarms, and then it's like, quick, let's develop a project. And so you look at that list of priorities and say like, oh, okay, it's collaboration, it's forest, and then how can we check all the boxes? And it's what we would say that grantees in general, and I would say the High Meadows Fund in particular, are really good about sniffing out genuine, well thought out, locally appropriate projects versus the ones that sound like the High Meadows Fund is going to fund them. So I think that it's good to look over the list of funding priorities, but I would also say like focus on what's good for this group first, because I think that the more you can present a project that feels really appropriate for this group and that everyone can really have some ownership over, and that again you can pull the appropriate partners into and then propose it to the High Meadows Fund, I think they would be more apt to fund that versus a list of buzzwords.
I have a few questions kind of related, but so you mentioned that the Planning Commission has been kind of wanting to get involved in more conservation-oriented projects, but it's the resources that are holding you back. And so I guess I'm curious what would this grant fund that would allow you to do that? So that's one piece. The other is mentioned also the Dummerston project, and I'm curious whether lumping these things together would work against us, or like would each. I'm not sure what the Dummerston thing, or was it Guilford thing, whether that was like a watershed that they were trying to conserve, or would that be like a separate proposal? So I guess I'm curious in like how we would actually utilize the funding in a way that would make progress and not be too thinly distributed.
Yeah, I mean, fundamentally, part of what it would fund is just our staff time. So we kind of see like you're all a group and you all are working, and again the Windham Regional Commission should be in a place where we are able to come and facilitate the meetings. I mean, Monica is wonderful, but she's technical support, right? She doesn't necessarily have to be here to facilitate. That can be something that we can lend support in. And it's also providing that regional context. So why should folks in Stratton necessarily care about what's happening in Guilford? We might be able to help make those connections and to do that work. And again, it comes down to the implementation of our regional plan. And if there's a conservation element associated in that, we might be able to actually work towards implementation, which serves these on-the-ground projects that conservation commissions are in support of. So there is just staff time and staff capacity. And with, again, needing support, future grant writing, so just capacity building, and then also even technical assistance to maps, and we're doing not just, geoprocessing even, and then cartography on top of that. That would answer your first question. And then your second question, that's where I'm sort of treading lightly because I don't have a proposal formed in my head and I don't want to be assuming of what the project's goals are here. So I want to tread delicately and say, yes, the WRC is interested in going for this, but also we don't want to come in a bullish way and kind of say, this is what you guys are going to do now because this is our proposal. I'm here to kind of see what the pieces are to make sense of how do things work together, and will there be efforts that naturally senesce if there's a more cohesive project here, or so on and so forth. So I don't have an answer to your second question, but I appreciate you bringing that up because we don't want to, again, our role is fundamentally supportive and we don't want to negate any good working momentum that might be happening with this group.
Lisa, do you want to say a few words about?
Sure. Well, Monica contacted me because after meeting with this group, she said that one of the interest was to bring landowners into the conversation. And that's what Coverts is really strives to do, is to have the conversation with landowners and then have them work to have conversations within their communities. And so, I had been looking at this grant. In fact, it was on my desk as she was, I was reading it, and as she called, I'm like, hey, you're kismet. And we are also looking, we had a meeting about a couple weeks before that with our board, looking at where we want to see things go in the future, and we're looking at how best to have that influence and having that peer network grow. And one of the things we were looking at is sort of taking that regional approach, really focusing the efforts in one region. We're statewide, and we would still do the statewide things that we do, but really kind of trying certain things in a region to see how best we can facilitate that. And so when she came forward with this, I'm like, ooh, that sounds really like kind of what we're thinking as well. And the grantees, those getting the grant either are applying for the grant either have to be a nonprofit or a municipality, and so we fall in that nonprofit range, and so that's certainly something that we would be able to do, is to be the applicant or the host applicant and filter things through. I'm in a similar position of not really having an exact proposal because obviously I'm not from here, I haven't been on these conversations, so I wouldn't pretend to know what works best here. And one of the things we found is some things that may work in one part of the state aren't going to work in another part, and so we really need to know from the people here what it is that you think may work, what it is you want to try. And we just really have to think about, when we're thinking about a grant, if that's the direction that this group chooses to go, what are those deliverables? And what you're really trying to do is create a more resilient Vermont that is able to handle climate change. Most recently, we had a proposal over the summer, a pilot project that we did with an intern from the Field Naturalist program up at UVM that worked with VCD, which is the Vermont Conservation Design, which looks at the high priority, some of the maps that you've seen that Monica's shown you. And she actually went and visited with 12 different landowners and mapped and very intensively worked individually with landowners. It was great. They loved it. They ate it up. But it was very labor intensive. She was able to do 12 properties. So we're kind of backpedaling with recommendations from that now. Okay, how do we move forward to have a different kind of impact with that information? And so that's some of where we're thinking. But other than that, we don't really have anything concrete or hard, particularly since we need to come into the conversation that you've been having.
And do you have anything to say from the Bonneville perspective?
Having worked with Windham Regional on the High Meadows grants through the Greenville Watershed Alliance, I see what your capacity is to administer this kind of project and feel like Bonneville would be available for supporting projects also really hear what Bill is saying and the momentum that I would like to see happen to make concrete progress on the earth. So don't want the project to be too diluted or abstract.
Totally agree. Yeah, ought to be an implementation element. And it's,
Or maybe not element, implementation with whatever other elements are necessary. But
Yeah, what I've been
implementation
listening to here, it
central.
sounds to me like we need to find out what the high priorities are. So that means some field work, and we need to do what are the implementation possibilities, spectrum, and then outreach to make sure that they happen. Seems to me that's the logical way to go about that.
but what's the implementation?
I mean, do we have incentives with the use value program? Do we do zoning overlay districts? Do we do some kind of money thing to make sure that people do conservation kinds of limits on their land so that the connectivity continues? So that range of things there. And then outreach is to make sure that all of these things are available to those folks who want to try them out and make sure that they get to be on the books somewhere.
Can all this be done in 4 weeks?
2 years.
Writing the grant.
Well, writing the grant maybe, but for sure, this is more than a year's project.
So I'm going to jump in too and say there are some examples that we could pull from. Actually, before I say that, I should say my own role. So with Fish and Wildlife, whether there's a grant or not, I am still available for technical assistance. If there's interest in writing the grant, I can be available somewhat to at least help with the writing of that grant. And my work is already funded. It's available. I would not ask for any money in the grant, but I can be there for assistance either way. If you were to pursue the grant, though, then there are some models to pull from. I think Jens might have mentioned at the last meeting, there's a partnership that's in some ways very similar called Science to Action, a project that pulls maybe four towns together in eastern Chittenden County. And they together went through a community visioning process. They reviewed town plans and bylaws and together made suggestions. They did some kind of a wildlife tracking aspect that might be similar to the iNaturalist project that Ashley has mentioned. And then they kind of pulled it together, all these different pieces. It sounds very similar in some ways to the different focus areas that you were thinking of before. So if there is interest in moving forward, we might be able to pull aspects from past projects in other parts of the state as well. So just on that part. I'm wondering, for the discussion, if it's worth. So my question for you all is, it seems like the rest of today's discussion, we can really go in two directions. And I don't think they're mutually exclusive, but there's this grant direction of, yeah, we have this interest in pursuing the grant, let's see where that can go. And in doing so, that could kind of form who the group is. Now that might seem like a backwards way of doing it. As Emily mentioned earlier, I've also worked with a lot of groups where that's how they got their start. Some small groups, some large groups. The Staying Connected initiative is a perfect example of a partnership that didn't exist until a grant opportunity came. This is the big initiative that Jens was talking about last time. And the grant is what gave that group direction. Now it might be ideal, it might not be ideal to do it that way, but it sometimes works. Now on the other hand, maybe the more traditional method, and perhaps the wiser, but we'll see, would be to really focus on who is this group? Who do you want to be? What's your vision? What is your scope of work? How do you want to move forward? Now tonight, I don't know if we'll be able to go completely through who is this group and how do you want to move forward and then also pursue the grant. And that's maybe the challenge, is this grant deadline that is approaching. But I really want to leave it up to you all. Which direction do you think you'd like to take this meeting? Do you want to really focus on that grant and how this group can develop to pursue that grant with a set list of objectives and a direction? Or should we start the perhaps slower method where we're really focusing on who is this group? Who do we want to be? How do we move forward?
Although I think 1 month still a deadline for a grant seems a little bit crazy to me. I like that it provides direction. I think the going down, through door number 2 of deciding as a group who we are, what we want to be, there's plenty of opportunity for things to fizzle out and people to lose interest and to not actually get to any concrete actions. I think a grant is a great way to get to action and to really hone the discussion to implementable pieces. So I like the idea of
there's another piece
structuring this discussion around the grant, and from that we come up with a group, and if we want to expand from that through this project, we will have opportunities to do that. But I worry that if we are too amorphous, it's going to be hard to kind of get back together too.
I would just add that from what I've heard from Monica, it sounds to me very much as though the grant could provide critical support to build, to maintain the capacity improvement in our group as well, to be doing those direct projects, which is what we need if we're going to have any impact to hone in on. And that a lot of the coordination, facilitation, administrative, whether it was through WRC, whether it was through someone hired part-time, whether that might even be through Coverts or Beacon anyway, or any other partner, could enable us to do that more. So I don't necessarily see it as just a framework that helps us hone in on what we need to do. I also see it as a resource to make it possible to do aspects of what we need to that we'd have potentially a hard time doing otherwise.
I'm going to add a detail to that. One of those conversations that Ashley and I had was about perhaps part of the funding would go towards hiring a coordinator, a part-time coordinator, to convene this group, or even do some visioning for who is this group and who do you want to be, and part of that could be a project funded. Now, of course, this is a partnership, so would need to figure out how to work that into the rest of the system.
Yeah, that almost sounds like another one. I just outlined 3. That would be like the 4th one.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So that project coordination itself could be one aspect of the grant.
Yep.
Would you mind just going back to that map you had up earlier?
Yeah. The one where we were.
Yeah.
Maybe at the county level or the more subdivision?
Where we were, I think, is good. Yeah, because I just want to, we've been talking a lot about this area right here, but this little thing right here is really the focus I have in mind for the work we were talking about with the folks from Dummerston, and that also includes Guilford. So if we're willing to include this little jobber here, then we can be talking about our regional conservation partnership that includes these towns, representatives from each of these towns, and the connection up here to the Green Mountain National Forest, which would bring in a couple more really interested players and merge these 2 projects that we've been talking about.
Yeah. And again, I have to go. I have to go to a Wardsboro select board meeting, and I acknowledge that there's probably not a worse time for me to leave. The conversation is getting really rich, so I'm totally remiss at having to do so, but I'll leave on a point. Is that again, I kind of see this working group and that working group at being in similar positions where there's a lot of clearly a lot of passion and a lot of motivation. And in this region, we have so much groundwork to work from. There has been a lot of mapping that has been done. There's a lot of resources from the state to use. There's a lot of technical expertise within the conservation commissions and within the other groups. A lot of really rich potential partnerships. I think that there's part of what makes this so challenging for us is that there's so much that we could possibly take and that we can possibly work. So I guess I'm not making so much of a solid point as to we'll be in touch. I would love to, I'm so eager to hear what comes of this meeting, and maybe I could follow up with some folks and again just see kind of what makes sense. And I apologize again for having to leave, but.
Emily, could you stick around just a couple more minutes to add a little context and maybe get you to bounce back? You were saying you have to leave at 7.
I do. I misspoke. I
Okay.
do. I have to be in Wardsboro at 7.
Go. Great, that
So
makes sense.
it's right now.
Cool.
May I ask what the topic is for you being there?
Sure. I'm going to be speaking about some road projects and municipal road general permit, water quality related road work.
Thanks.
So
I have to go
I'll
later
just-
also.
Are you headed up there also?
Yes, but I'm going to leave a little later.
Okay.
I'll just touch back on the context, hearing about this project in Dummerston. It sounds like one of those things where it's like, what can we do of significance within our town, within the context of our town, and maybe looking at, this also highlights a little bit at the statewide conservation prioritization mapping level. And just to touch back on what we're doing here is really oriented from the broadest ecological level on down, at the ecoregion level, huge area, almost all of New England, all of the Maritimes provinces, parts of Quebec, parts of New York State. One of the top 9 areas for wildlife linkage habitat is from southern Vermont south through the Berkshires. So incredibly significant at this broad scale, and the significance there is to connect to the Green Mountain National Forest, because then you got this huge, pretty intact north-south connector, which is critical for climate change. Having north-south is critical for elevation, having up and down, and that brings our area out to the wider linkages throughout the ecoregion. And that's why we've sort of honed in on this link from the Massachusetts border to the Green Mountains, and potentially a secondary link here. The whole of the county has a lot of significant areas in it that would be really great to build this out into, especially areas that are significant that already have some emphasis. But I would hate for us to lose sight of this context if we start doing things just like, here in this little context, what can we do? As opposed to what flows from the broader conservation context, the broader ecoregion context, and how can we serve that? How can we think like a mountain, to use Alba Leopold's phrase, or think like an ecoregion, or think like a wildlife linkage? I would hate to get lost in either the bureaucracy or the town-based approach. And the great strength, I think, that we've started to form in getting together is recognizing that there is no way to do something ecologically impactful at the level of a single town. So I would very much love it if we can build in whatever projects that are more based that way, but keep the emphasis on connecting through our area as part of the ecoregion.
Emily, I just want to say, just to vouch for this Dummerston working group, they have, I think that the project initiative should be kind of the specific one, but the tone of the conversation ended with really being expanding the geographic scope. So it wouldn't negate this work just because it might be town boundary.
No,
Well,
totally.
we
I
could
don't-
be talking about phases in terms of the region.
Yeah.
We got phase 1 is this area until we get to figure out what we're doing, and then expand to more other parts.
And I would just add that.
Actually, why do you feel that little arm off this artery is not?
I think
your body
it's
parts is.
clearly highly significant. My point is the perspective, right? Building from something local and saying, it's got some greater significance beyond that, as opposed to saying, here's this ecoregion context, this critical conservation need that we steward, and how do we serve that sort of, from the broader ecological context down to what we do locally. feels like it has a lot more potential to contribute to the future of biodiversity in our part of the world than starting local and then trying to add sort of some context to local. And for my part, I would hate to lose that aspect. I would love to keep our emphasis flowing from the broad context. You know, the basic tenet of conservation biology is landscape is a fundamental unit of conservation. So thinking from this ecoregion to the state to the broader landscape on down feels a lot more hopeful to me. And if, in particular, if we can be a forum for bringing that into what we do, I'm not suggesting that what they're doing here isn't with some of that intention, but from what I've heard so far, it doesn't seem like it's sort of built from that overarching landscape.
Actually, you know,
Yeah.
it is. It was just framed.
Cool.
Can
Awesome.
we get a little more context for that? Because
Yeah.
I think, I just don't know
Yeah.
what that project is, so I guess
And
that's why I'm not getting why
totally.
it seems
And
tangential.
what I would just add is also in terms of the grant and administration, it seems to me, I don't want to project this onto the group, but it seems to me that there's a lot of potential to do good administrative stuff, but none of that really contributes to our mission unless it enables this stuff on the ground to happen, sort of, I think what you were saying earlier, Patty, right? And I think that could be a tricky thing with the grant that we might end up touching on, especially with certain partners, is how can we keep it really focused on the conservation mission that's brought us together.
Question there, does that Dummerston thing extend into New Hampshire?
Good question.
I believe when you look at the broader perspective, that is thought to be one of the places where wildlife are most likely to
Yeah, that's what I
cross
was
the canal.
thinking. So there we go, two states,
I would,
3 states with New Hampshire, Vermont, Massachusetts, all in that corner.
I might also suggest that there are a couple ways of going about it. There's the starting with this map and really focusing on those dark green areas, or they're starting with the idea of connectivity and wherever that comes about. Because even outside of this, you know, around Bonnievale, there's certainly connectivity. One landowner next to another landowner, sharing management of their woodlot. You know, I don't know, but there's at the local scale, these maps change. This map is made at that eco-regional scale, but there's looking at the dark green areas, or there's looking at this idea of connectivity. Go ahead, and then I have a suggestion for moving forward.
Okay, well, that's what I was gonna have a suggestion for moving forward. Maybe it's the same things that you were just gonna say, but so instead of talking about what towns are included or not right now, if we start with connectivity as like this overarching theme, and then what are the things underneath? What are the bullet points underneath that? So part of it is maintaining that, you know, connectivity, ways of quantifying what organisms are relying upon that connectivity. How do you do that, you know, at the landscape level, but at the town level? And it sounds like some of the things that we've been talking about are how you communicate with landowners about this. How are the town's planning commissions and conservation commissions going about this issue of connectivity and having those conversations, like that example that you gave. This seems like that was the impetus for these initial meetings. It's like how is each conservation commission going about dealing with the wildlife movement and connectivity of habitat? And then from our very first meeting that we had in Marlborough, I can't remember how long ago that was. Yeah, it's like towns are going about it in different ways, and so maybe part of it is having some, you know, dialogue that can lead to greater consistency, and then also have an education outreach piece, because I think that's a big piece of it. Like in Vermont, people care about conservation until it's telling them where they should build on their property, and so that's, you know, a big piece of this is like how we educate landowners and residents.
Well, so that brings, I think, up a really good point, that I think whether this is moving forward with the grant or just forming this group, there are 2 things that I think really need to happen. One is there needs to be a cohesive vision. What is the primary vision that everybody here, it sounds like there's some different ways of going about it. There's working with landowners, there's working with that municipal aspect, there are different geographies, different ideas of the geography, but what is the vision that pulls all of that together? And then I'm also just going to go into the second thing. So think about that vision. That's the first thing we'll discuss. But the second thing would be the scope. Which aspects do you want to pursue? That municipal aspect and working with landowners and doing outreach and education in a more general sense, and this capacity building. And did I miss anything from your list? Was that it? Okay.
Yep.
Perfect. Is that the scope, or are we missing some pieces, or would you like to focus more? But before we go there, I just wanted you to kind of know where I was going, but let's really think about that vision. Does that sound like a good place to start? Does somebody want to throw out their vision of what do you want to see? Why are you here at this table? What is it that you would like to see happen in this region? We know it has something to do with this idea of connectivity, but can you throw out a sentence of that vision? What would the future look like?
In 500 years?
Well, say that's a good question. You kind of need the time frame, right?
Yeah.
In 50 years. What would you like it to look like in 50 years?
This is kind of corny, but I think that we're talking about like connectivity through connections that we have like locally, but then have broader implications. But I think that we're trying to tackle this issue of connectivity by connecting to our neighbors.
Absolutely.
So I think that part of this is outreach between the towns, and then
would anybody like to take notes for everybody to see? I can try. I'm happy to do it. All right. Thank you. Sure. Or maybe it's not even for everybody to see, but just so that we can share afterwards. So connecting wildlife, but also by connecting neighbors. Is that? All right. Somebody else's vision can either add to that or be different.
I would like to see all native species that are, well, all right, this gets a little trickier.
I was thinking of your opossums, right?
Exactly.
Right.
This is how
I
it
mean,
gets
a few
trickier.
years ago, there weren't any.
And coyotes and,
Black vultures and stuff like that.
yes, all wild species native to this landscape have the habitat needs to exist here in perpetuity.
All right. So habitat needs protected. I'm just trying to give it a few words, but yeah.
Yeah, but it's not just.
I don't need to condense what you're
It's not just the habitat, because the critters move around a lot, right? So you want to make sure that they can move over a range that's good for forage and winter shelter and stuff like that.
Okay. Did that make sense, Lisa?
Well, this is what I wrote. They get to tell me if it made sense.
The species have habitat needs into the future and the space to find what they need.
Sure.
All right.
I would perhaps propose also the ability for our region to serve the wider connections between wildlands up to the ecoregion scale. So we're not just looking at like our town or our group of several towns or our county, but we're realizing how we fit into the world and some particularly important aspects of that stand out that we steward whether we realize it or not. Try to
The role
serve
in the
that
bigger picture.
stewardship.
Yeah, so I mean, we kind of ought to go back to that connection things again, because we got the critters themselves moving around on the landscape. And then we have the landscape, which has its own limitations. And then we have land ownership, which has another connection. And then we have the bureaucracy of towns and municipals and other groups. Those all need to be connected. So that's kind of like, what, 4 of them?
Yeah. Now, what I would encourage in this part of the discussion is I know it's really hard, but to try to avoid the challenges, the obstacles. Like, yes, it will be hard to convince certain landowners. It will be hard to get past bureaucracies, but if we can share a common vision, then maybe those discussions can come up later. And I'm not trying to, I'm not trying to pass that up. I think it's really valuable to have.
Well, one of the interesting things was I did the first critter corridor in a zoning in the town of Stratton. The only reason they would consider it was because Windham Regional says, we won't give you approval of your town plan unless you do that. Right, and so that's one of the few things that I worked on that is actually still there. So there needs to be a little bit of all of those things at once.
Yeah, absolutely.
So just as a slight deviation from what we're doing with the broad visioning right now, I want to just bring up the concept of regional conservation partnerships and point out my favorite one as a potential model, and it's one that came up at our last meeting, the Cold Hollow to Canada partnership, because they do a lot of things that address a lot of what we're talking about here, from landowner education. In fact, that's one of their primary thrusts, gathering together groups of large landowners to celebrate their land and have meetings to talk about management, much the way
Many of them are coverage cooperators.
Yeah, coverage cooperators. They also run a citizen science tracking project.
They've done a lot with the municipal planning aspect as well. There's
Yeah,
that municipal-
and they've gotten some grants as well to buy easements.
Yes,
exactly.
some really big money. And I've always really liked that model because my understanding is there are a couple of representatives from members of each of 6 different towns, I think, that serve on a steering committee, often a member of the Conservation Commission. And
Yeah,
so it's not a lot of people from large organizations just coming into a region and saying, here's how you folks can do it, but really it has a real grassroots feel.
so that sounds to me like part of your vision as well, that this is a grassroots effort.
But I want it to be effective too.
Yeah, okay, so an effective, but supported by the grassroots community effort.
Yeah.
You know, that also gave me an idea. If others like that model, as we're thinking of visions and mission statements, why don't we look up theirs? It might be, for something like this, I think it's totally appropriate to steal a mission statement and then adapt it for your own.
Be inspired
Because
by it.
yeah, exactly. You're trying. Thank you. Not really stealing, but adopt a mission statement and then adopt and adapt. Because what you're trying to do here, I think, is very similar to the model that already exists. So you don't necessarily have to start from scratch.
On that note, there is a free conference coming up at the University of Massachusetts on developing regional conservation partnerships in November sometime, and I can send a link around to everybody. It looks really exciting. They have a lot of great speakers. It's just one day.
Do you want to hear their mission and vision?
Yeah.
Our vision is a healthy and intact forested landscape that supports a strong, sustainable local economy through stewardship, with protection of core wildlife habitat and connectivity across the entire northern forest. We can achieve this vision when there is ongoing stewardship of our region's forests built on a foundation of biological diversity and ecosystem resilience, permanent protection of the largest unfragmented blocks of contiguous forest in our region, caring economic use of our forests to sustain their productivity into the future, connected forests through our region that allow for the movement of wildlife, communities' appreciation of and commitment to preserving the region's rich forest heritage that defines our home.
Sounds good.
Let's adopt that right now, huh?
I mean, certainly echoes some of the things that we've been saying.
Yeah, and just to repeat what we have here, connectedness, communities and individuals. Wild species have habitat needs into the future and the space to find what they need. The region serves connections throughout the larger region, the northern forest region, and that it's from a grassroots effort that is also effective. I like that part. It's got to be effective. That's part of the vision, right?
There's
No,
also,
I'm not sure. Go
there's
ahead.
also an interdependence that isn't always obvious between us humans and the other creatures that are utilizing the spaces around us. And I think part of that grassroots effort and the connections with landowners and so forth is getting to the value of that and the necessity in the long
So
haul.
understanding that interconnectedness and acting on it, did that, it's not quite.
Well,
Same.
yes, I mean, because it, without an understanding of that, it goes to that education and outreach information, which involves the science as well, to explain things to people. But I think, you know, without people on board, it's not
Yeah.
going to work.
Well, go ahead. Here's my suggestion. I'm conscious of the time, and my thought is we're probably not going to develop that strong vision statement or the mission statement tonight. But I think we have some good ideas to start from, including this and looking at Cold Hollows to Canada and kind of thinking about the different aspects that they've worked harder on and thinking about whether they do apply here. How do folks feel with these visions? Is this something that everybody's feeling like can kind of get behind these as a whole? Is there some agreement on what we are looking for? Is it about what do you think? Is this kind of capturing what you feel you're here for?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, there's a consensus. This is, yeah.
Okay.
The one thing I didn't hear emphasized in that vision statement, and I'm not sure has been directly articulated here, that feels important to me, I don't know if it does to everyone else, but is emphasizing the critical locations where connectivity, the linkages, can become readily broken. In the same way that we're recognizing that, you know, they put this emphasis on protecting large intact forest blocks, and that certainly matters, but the first way biodiversity is lost is by fragmentation. And the first place fragmentation is lost is where human access is, which is along roads. And even in a place that's relatively, you know, sparse in human impacts, like southeast Vermont, like most of southeast Vermont.
Isn't that how we
even a
got
wilder-
started here?
Even a wilder part of it, like this critical mass to Green Mountains linkage segment that we've been talking about from the get-go. There are still areas of significant impingement there, and those areas could be broken pretty easily, and one break could potentially do this whole thing in from the ecoregion level on down. And so I feel like it would be incumbent upon us, if we're intending to serve all this stuff, to really articulate an emphasis on how we maintain forest connectivity across roads, because that's where I think the greatest jeopardy lies.
You just underline that first word there.
I heard two things there, and one is that vision of understanding how fragmentation impacts everything, and one of those is also a method of learning more about which of those places are the places to start, to prioritize and work on. Does that make sense? So there's the vision, and then it's also kind of bridging us into this next piece, which is the scope. Did you have more to add to the vision before we move on, though?
Well, it's kind of the next step, because I'm just looking at Cold Hollow, Canada, their completed projects. They've got 4 areas here. So one is land conservation, one is Conservation Commission assistance and partner connection. Another one is outreach and citizen science, and then the other one is, I think specific to them, is establish first Cold Hollow woodlots group. So under land conservation, there was a vision document sent to landowners with 200 plus acres, priority parcels identified, connectivity areas identified with Staying Connected initiative. They conserved 13 properties totaling 3,700 acres, assisted in forest legacy projects. Then under the Conservation Commission assistance, they have ongoing collaborations with these groups. Worked with Vermont Natural Resource Council to develop town plans, bylaws to prevent fragmentation, hosted Conservation Commission Summit, co-sponsored events, full partner summit, Then they have the outreach citizen science where they have these projects, tracking, a newsletter, a magazine, workshops. They hire part-time staff to coordinate outreach and partner. So I think they're getting at some of those things like underneath these.
Right.
You know,
So it sounds to
sections
me
of
like
itself.
they're actually outlining more than one way to interrupt movement of critters.
Absolutely.
Right, so roads are one of the ways, and there are small lot subdivisions are another way, and so on. So maybe we can make that a little broader than just roads.
Well, let me clarify what I'm saying. I'm not saying that the road itself is impacted. The roads are there, yet we still have connectivity. But development concentrates along roads. Roads are linear
Right.
paths of development. If you complete a line, let's say east-west through a north-south section, or north-south or east-west section, you break that connection. That will happen first along roads. It won't happen in the big wild areas. It won't happen far from roads.
Yeah,
So
but in terms
that's-
of
so
a
the actual-
vision,
so-
I keep thinking the interruption of those connections is what we're really getting at.
And the reason I say
And a
roads,
big
it's not
part of
because
that
roads
is
matter,
roads.
it's because that's where
Yeah.
the interruptions matter. And if we don't hone in on that, we won't be able to be as effective.
Yeah, I don't
So
think
it sounds
anyone's
like-
saying that we should do that, but just.
And the reason I'm just emphasizing it is because it hasn't been fully articulated that that is the critical.
Well, that could be under the scope if we talk about the
Okay.
larger vision first.
Yeah, that's what it sounds like to me as well, as under the scope. It could even be that, yeah, that focusing on those hotspots or transportation corridors, not just the road, but the whole area. That could be part of the scope.
That was one of the outcomes from our pilot project, was because it was working with individual landowners, but took the regional aspect of the VCD, it brought, or the statewide, then it brought it down to the region, then it brought it down to the individual landowner, and then, oh, this is a priority wildlife crossing, oh, but you don't have a lot of vegetation here, perhaps as a landowner, you want to plant vegetation to help enhance that corridor. Or if you cut this, you're going to be a threat to that corridor. So it was that one-on-one education that came out of that. So I think that you would find that as you drill down.
And as Jamie listed all of those different projects that they've worked on, I'll again emphasize that as you move forward, I think it's absolutely appropriate to look at projects like that to get ideas for what might work here. A lot of those projects have already been tested in one place. They have a model to work from. You can learn from their experience instead of starting from square one. Again, I think this vision will need to be tinkered with as you move forward, and it could be a full part of a session, a whole part of a meeting to really hone in on that. What do you think about kind of outlining a few areas that you want to focus on as the scope? Does that make sense now? Are we ready to move to that aspect?
I think so, yeah.
Okay. So the scope. So these are some things I put up here. Sure. These are things that kind of got mentioned at the last meeting, so I put them up here. This is not a project list for this region. It's really up for discussion. But things that were discussed last time was, so starting at this municipal level. Sorry, I'm standing right in front of you. But then I'm standing in front of you.
No, you're good. We're right over here. We can
I
sit
have
behind you.
So the municipal side, municipal assistance, how can conservation commissions and planning commissions and select boards move forward with projects at the town level? And in terms of scope, that could mean working with somebody like me or like the NRC, who can look at town plans and review them. It could look at these mapping initiatives of working with one individual town at a time to look at what connectivity looks like in that region. It might be the Regional Planning Commission might play a strong role in that aspect, but really focusing on that town municipal presence of in planning and bylaws, as well as potentially whole town, one town at a time outreach programs or educational programs. So that's one aspect. Kind of go through this list, but then I want this to ultimately come from you as well. Outreach and education efforts, walks and talk series that just get people outside, thinking about the role that they play in their landscape and what is happening out there. Work with landowners, some of the projects that Lisa's been talking about, or that have come up from the Cold Hollows to Canada area, where they really have focused on these landowner working groups. More science, maybe that's tracking, maybe it's Maybe it's hiring a tracker or using somebody who you have right here in your community to lead tracking workshops. Or I think Ashley has mentioned this iNaturalist idea where you can start looking for wildlife road crossings that are important. Working towards this group's sustainability, as we've talked about, whether that's establishing a coordinator who holds regular meetings, whether it's doing a visioning process to really figure out who else should be at this table and figure out a way to get them here. That type of project. Does this, I mean, these are all things we've talked about, but in terms of how you want to move forward, what are you thinking? Which of these stand out to you? What's missing from that list?
Well, under science would be tracking and mapping and so on, right? So
Sure.
we gotta actually, and maybe, never mind. But the science is a bigger thing than just tracking, I guess.
Yeah, and I think the mapping could either fall under science or under the municipal realm, wherever that goes. Maybe that's its own category, I don't know.
So another piece that may not be up there is the actual acquisition of easements.
That's true, land conservation is not up there.
Conservation itself, so whether it's having land trust representatives as part of the working group or a strategy for conserving land.
And right now, that isn't very available for small, high value parcels in the front country, even though that's the most critical threat, the most critical need for connectivity. So there's also the challenge of how can the paradigm be shifted, how can the capacity be built beyond the scope of this organization?
Yeah, how do we hit those drug-addled people that own a couple acres in the right place, right?
Exactly. You talking about my brother?
Sort of.
Not only how do you lead, but how is there a way for, if they make that choice, for that area to be conserved? There isn't an easement mechanism unknown around here that can do small parcels in the front country for wildlife road crossings where the fragmentation is the greatest threat.
Which of these, so this plus land conservation plus, expanding science to include more maps. Did I miss anything that was just said?
Well, and science really needs to be a accumulation of evidence that we need to make the change, right? So in a sense, it's not just new science or whatever, but maybe collating all the existing stuff.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yep. If you were to, sign your name next to one of these as something that you're particularly interested in, which ones would be covered? Which ones would you? I'm saying this as an individual level because to keep a working group going, you need to have some interest, and you're going to naturally gravitate towards some of these than others. And oftentimes the starting places are the ones where you have a lot of interest. So I'm curious to ask, which ones stand out as important to you all?
Those are two different questions.
Yeah, there are.
Sorry, I kept talking. I don't remember what my questions
No,
were.
it's, which one do you gravitate toward personally?
Uh-huh.
Which one would you be most likely to do, and which one do you think is most important?
Oh, I see. That's a really good point. Yeah. So which one do you think is most important? Let's start that. Start there. And you can choose more than one. I'm not trying to put limits on you. Just that I think it's important as a group to think about where to place your emphasis.
Well, actually, there's one kind of under the other is implementation. I mean, in my mind, getting people to do stuff is the most important thing. Mm-hmm. And do it over a long period of time, because my experience has been that doesn't happen.
It could be that
your
one
outcome?
thing.
Yeah, outcomes.
And one part towards, I might put this, what I'm about to say, under this working group sustainability, but it might be that it would be worthwhile to have some training from a professional who can say, this is what makes the public want to stand behind you. There are facilitators out there. There are groups out there.
I was at a thing on string quarters, and this lady came and talked about how to tell a story.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? It's not what you think is important, it's what you can get people to buy into with a story that relates to that.
So yeah, so it could be that really working towards, and maybe this isn't the right wording for that, but working towards understanding how to move the project forward and building that into your work.
Motivational,
What is it?
motivational implementation.
Motivational implementation. I like that.
Doesn't that come under outreach and education, though? That's how you're gonna.
Yeah,
people,
but the story thing is really, it's education, but it's playing with people's emotions.
It's marketing.
Yeah, marketing.
Yeah.
Or said another way, it's connecting.
Good point. What else for others? What do you think is really important in this, in doing this work, in achieving that vague vision that we talked about?
Nails just seem so integrated to me that it's hard for me to like isolate one.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I think working with landowners is how you can, you know, actually affect change, but in order to do that effectively, you need to have some good science behind it and some good outreach and education and, you know, have the structures in place that would allow you to do that and have some teeth to it. So, I don't know, I guess.
I think that's a great thing to add as well. Yeah.
And planning and zoning as appropriate in each municipality is a huge part of that too, which also depends on the science and the outreach and the education.
Yeah, but in Guilford, there's no such thing as zoning.
Yeah.
That's right.
Well, they have a town plan, but nothing else.
Well, and maybe that's where it really needs to focus, that municipal part really needs to focus on each area differently.
Based on vision, goals, objectives.
I'm not hearing any of these get discarded.
You're right.
And that's fine. I'm not trying to encourage you to discard
Can I
them.
just clarify, what is work towards group sustainability?
That's the part that, I mean, that's my wording. It might not be the best wording, but it's really focusing on how to build this group to best represent the community and to be the most effective.
And for a
Does
long
that
period
make
of
sense?
time.
For a
not
long
just-
period of time. So it might be getting a coordinator. It might be having these trainings to really, you know, have somebody in to talk about that marketing
Paying
aspect.
for dinner at your meetings.
Yeah, it might be, exactly. It might be, yeah, how to have food at your events so that you all want to keep coming, that kind of thing. But really focusing on the group itself, and that's probably in there. It's really in there as this was a list of possibilities to add to that grant application, where it could be that one of those goals that you mentioned in the grant is building this group. Now, I'm conscious of the time, it's 7:20. We have a lot that we didn't discuss, which is, I mean, that's of course what would happen. But I'm wondering at this point how this group might like to move forward. There's a lot that we did talk about. There's a lot more to talk about. There's this grant that's kind of hanging over us with a looming deadline. If there's going to be pursuit of that grant, there need to be a lot of conversations that happen soon, obviously. Even without that, there needs to be some plan for the future. Last time we planned this meeting, but we don't have anything else on the books. So I leave it to you. What do you think the best next steps forward are?
I feel like I should say that it sounds like Windham Regional Commission is going to be applying for this grant, regardless of what we decide to do as a group. And it might be that, and they're likely to get it because they have a great history with them, so it might behoove us to plug into their efforts and make sure that they're representing us, given that they're likely to be applying for it.
Do you know like what their vision or scope is for, like, do they just want to apply for it and like something like this, they'd be like, great, we'll put our name on it, or do they have a vision and is it different than this?
Emily described that in our initial session before the meeting, and she said that their interest was something that they don't regard as particularly hip, I think there's something like the term she used, but basically to collate the objectives of different conservation organizations and efforts throughout the county and try to see where the overlapping needs are and then focus funding toward whatever can meet those needs, which could include, support staff time to, assist with a common theme, need for
So that sounds big enough that we could like
Right.
plug these.
Well, she also said she didn't want to really push an agenda on us.
Yeah.
Just within that overall goal.
Yeah, that's what I was kind of curious about, like
They were
whether
coming from an administrative
they
lens.
want to do this.
Yeah.
They want to do it in a way that's going to
Yeah.
like help people. So
Yeah.
Right.
yeah.
And through administration, it might be, from what I heard, a challenge to us to find a way to partner with that and keep the emphasis on application and outcome rather than sort of process and organizational capacity stuff.
Because that's what they would be focusing on.
Well, I'm all for getting the group to say, yep, we'll help Windham Regional if they want to go do that. But I certainly don't want to be the next to the top point person doing that.
So, but the next step might be to like reconvene with Emily.
Might be. I'm going to put you on the spot in a second,
Yeah.
Lisa. That's my warning. I know I heard Lisa earlier say she's also another organization that could potentially work towards something. And I don't know. I mean, you came to the meeting not knowing a lot about the group.
So I don't do
but
this.
I don't. Yeah, exactly.
And I don't really do this.
Right.
I do a lot of this.
Yeah, yeah.
And I'm really happy to be involved and help out in that aspect and can help guide a little of this because this won't happen without this. So, and we have some expertise with partnering with Fish and Wildlife in the VCD aspect, and that's where they would come in.
Yeah.
And looking at that statewide, regional, down to a landowner or a community, and whatever. It's hard to say, to take this big view, but you have to look up, you might want to take the big view, but you're still working in small spaces. And so that's just something to think about. But the kinds of workshops that I would envision, having listened to this for us, would be some of these kind of explaining what Vermont conservation design is to the community so they understand the importances of these linkages, seeing where they fit into those linkages as a town, and then as how they drill down, so maybe some biofinder trainings like Monica does. Also passing land, so that's a big thing that Coverts is involved in. How do we pass lands to the next generation? If I have 3 kids and I break it up into 3 different pieces, it's parcelized, it may not be fragmented yet, but if each of those kids then builds a house, we've now fragmented the habitat. So how do they, if they care in keeping the land intact, how do they pass that land to the next generation? And so we host some workshops on passing lands to the next generation. Those are the kinds of things that we can partner with, do through the Regional Conservation Mission. We can help facilitate that as the grant holder. So there's, I throw that at you. I don't
Yeah.
So it seems like our discussion is sort of centering on the grant. Are we taking it as understood that this
It
is
sounds-
something we
sounds
want to
right.
do? That seemed like that was the consensus, yeah.
I
We want to
suggest-
do it, but I'm not sure anyone's raising their hand to write it. so
Right.
if-
Well, I mean,
Except for
I
Monica.
can assist
Right
with
part.
the municipal and the science part. And probably Patty can do the science part as well. And so, I mean, we got a couple of those categories covered right here. The coordination with groups, we got a couple of those guys here. So it almost sounds like the next meeting ought to be at WRC, and it ought to be soon.
But I really like bringing in what Lisa's group has with what WRC can do, and really focus on what we're wanting to accomplish.
And I think that's the beauty of this particular grant, in that it really is about building the partnerships, where there's one entity that will apply for a grant, but I think the idea is that funding can be channeled in different directions. So
I
it
mean,
could
we
be
could
that
do
there would be-
co-sponsors. I mean, my Conservation Commission will certainly co-sponsor. Bonneville could probably co-sponsor. I don't know what the other conservation commissions or planning commissions would be willing to do. But it sounds like we could all be kind of co-sponsors in a sense.
We have no money.
Well, neither do we.
That's
But you
always
know
a good
what?
That's
thing.
why we But as steering, like as a steering committee, so you're all represented on, this becomes your steering committee, your board, your whatever it is that is guiding this, is made up of these organizations. And so that if we say, all right, we're gonna do these kinds of workshops all around, and so we're gonna do a plant passing lands in Guilford, but of course, anybody who wants to drive to Guilford can be a part of it. It's not just for Guilford, they're just the sponsor of it. And then Marlboro might sponsor the iNaturalist, because if we can teach landowners how to use iNaturalist and they're putting in their information, then we learn more about the wildlife in our area. And then maybe in Newfane, then we're hosting a workshop on wildlife tracking, how to identify the tracks.
Well, just to let you know, the Conservation Commissions of Windham County meet twice a year as a group.
Oh, good.
But it does not include all towns.
Correct. Not all towns have conservation
Right,
committees.
right.
But certainly the scope of this could go beyond just these linkages we've specifically named and pointed to, but could be countywide and could incorporate
Yeah.
many of those organizations.
Well, I kind of like the Windham region, because it's based on drainage areas of the West River and the Connecticut River, basically.
Yeah. Now, moving forward, again, it feels like there are a lot of big question marks, and if we're going to pursue this grant, there's not a lot of time. I'm thinking the question I have next for you is, how would you like to be involved in that writing of the grant? I think I have some capacity to help with that. I'm happy to reach out to Emily, and getting to her empty chair. I can work with Lisa. But who else? How should we communicate? Because of course Emily and Lisa and I are not this group. We don't have the knowledge of your landscape and your desires. How can we best communicate with all of you so that we really are doing what you'd like to see?
Could we have like a shared Google Doc where people would be able to view and make comments on the document? I don't know if that would get too messy with too many.
Yeah, it gets messy. I think it would be better to do, well, I guess there's an MS Doc way too, but whichever of the two, Google or Microsoft, passing them along by email probably works better than actually each of us editing something. I think that doesn't really work well. I've done a couple of projects, and it seems like making comments and sending it to 1, 2 or 3 people that are gonna do the final thing is a better way to do that than everybody trying to edit everything.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes with Google Doc, you can, rather than everyone like actually changing the document itself, but a link could be sent out at times when there's new content, and then like you can comment on it rather than like,
Maybe that'll work. I haven't seen that.
Where everybody would be able to read it and see it, and then you can comment.
Yes, but not actually change it. I
Right.
think if everyone was going in and changing it, that could be.
Yeah, that makes sense.
I would think you'd need to have a conference call rather than to pass a document around. And if they're going to be the lead on this, it'd be nice to have them submit something in terms of what their ideas are for talking points to get started, and then decide, what you're going to do, and maybe then circulating documents. But
Yeah, I actually have some meetings like that.
Which actually reminds me of with one thing that we haven't mentioned with this grant is that they don't require, but they request a 1 to 2 paragraph description that you can submit in advance, and then they can give feedback on. Like
So
an
that's
abstract
next
for the
week.
project. Yeah, so there's no particular deadline for that, but I'd say if this is a reality, should probably get a move on that. But that's not only going to help them or help all of us, it can really help refine the project's goals into that 1 to 2 paragraphs in the near future.
What do you think would be the best way to go forward? I mean, do you think we should have another meeting with a document that everyone discusses, or like what? I mean, what have you seen?
And with Donna heading out, I'm just wondering, in particular, just to provide one bit of context that might fit in Donna's immediate departure, do we want to see if it's possible to have, say, an hour-long meeting with Emily and maybe another person or two from the Windham Regional Commission to discuss this, make sure that their orientation to what they want to do actually serves what we're trying to do, and to sort of set the stage that if they are the primary applicant, we know that there's a fit.
I say yes.
That sounds good to me. I don't know if anybody else.
Do you, here's my question. Is that best done with one of us calling them, mentioning this scope that we came up with, and just saying, these are the projects that, or this is the scope that the group has come up with to work on. Would you work with that before having the grant meeting, or should we have the meeting with everybody?
Sounds good.
I'm happy to do that if you'd like. If there's somebody here who would like to, that's fine too. Okay, sounds good. I can call Emily.
So you have that conversation, and then the next step is.
So then the next step
Donna, just
is,
as
should
you're
I?
reading, if we do have an hour-long meeting, is something like 5 to 6 or 5:30 to 6:30 on a Tuesday a good option? Just to do something that seems to work repeatedly for this group.
I can make it work.
Okay.
Earlier than 5:30 is hard.
Okay, so 5:30 to 6:30 meeting. Okay, cool. Thank you. Have a great night. Thanks so much.
All right, bye.
So then maybe the next step is, I know Ashley has his email list that he's been sending out. Is that effective for all of you? To at least decide on that next step via email after that initial conversation with Emily? Yeah. Okay, I know sometimes in email land things can really get lost, and I don't want to lose this. But I'm happy to start that conversation with that list if that is an effective way to reach you.
Something we could do too is put somewhere, a fairly manageable scale group, put phone numbers down on the sign-in list today, and that way if there isn't, some people don't get back by email, someone, maybe me, maybe Monica, who knows, could call just to make sure that we are able to coordinate.
Sure.
Did we write down our phone numbers last time? No?
All right, so I feel like there are a lot of question marks. There will probably be quite a flurry of that email. That's what I'm expecting, so this is my warning to you all. But I'm also really conscious of the time.
Yeah.
So, any last thoughts before we convene? It sounds like a really exciting, whatever this is. Next 2 years, next 10 years, I don't know.
A good name.
What was
Yeah.
that?
We have to come up with a good name.
I was thinking that too.
So
Monica's
far, I
been-
have Windham Regional Connectivity Initiative, Thinking Linkages, Thinking Linking.
Oh, I like that.
I like that. I haven't heard that one.
That's all I have so far.
And Monica's been tossing out the idea of a connected place as sort of
Kind of a general one, yeah. If there, and if there are places here, I don't know the region well enough, but if you have those, cold hollows to Canada, those ends that you're connecting, or something that describes the region, you know this place far better than me.
Berkshires to
Yeah.
Berkshires to the
north.
I don't know, we need something more original.
Yeah, we do.
Yeah. Anyway, it's exciting to be working with you all, so thank you. Do you all have my contact information if you need it?
How do you spell your last name? Just kidding.
Do you really want it? Yes.
All right, and maybe just a bit of context that would help me thinking about this with
Yeah.
regard to the grant. There's more than one of these, yes? They're going to be
More than one.
one 2-year $50,000 amount.
Oh, I think they have.
They have 200,000 to get out.
Yeah.
250,000. Okay.
Yeah. So depending on who applies and which projects they choose,
There'd be effectively roughly 4-ish of these.
4 to 6 kind of.
Yeah. Which means that if there is another one proposed in Windham County, it's pretty sure both wouldn't happen.
I think this is a pretty competitive
Intense-
one.
Intense.
I think there will be a lot of applications.
Yeah, it's a brand new grant round that's going on with the focus that many organizations are interested in. It's state money, like within state, it's not a federal grant. As Emily said, it's easy to sort of manage it. So there are a number of organizations. But I think that the power of this group is that it's all of these conservation and / planning commissions, if the state, if you pull us into it, that it has a lot of what they're looking for in terms of collaboration, partnerships, and reaching and making a difference. So the thing to really think about as you're thinking about this is like, what are these outcomes? You know, outcomes, getting people to do stuff. Okay, we have stuff, and it's like when my kids do writing and they write stuff, I'm like, okay, what is stuff? So you all really need to that. What is stuff? What do you want people to do? You want them to, and what are you able to support? Like we want them to conserve land, but maybe we don't have the money to do that. So that's maybe not something that can be an outcome of this grant, but educating them on ways to conserve their land. And we're going to host 3 workshops that do that, reaching this many people. That's your deliverable.
And the value, teaching them the value of conserving their land.
Correct, what it is. Yeah,
And
so
I
you
think
have to really
that's what
think
a
in
lot of
terms
this
of
is
that
going to-
deliverable.
Yeah, for the grant itself, I think this is where we might give a lot of suggestions in this, you know, whatever this proposal is moving forward, but it'll really be up to you guys to decide. I like that one, I don't like that one. Because we might be putting those specifics on.
I hope I'm wrong, but I feel like the biggest challenge in that may be how to work. It seems like obligatory to work with the Windham Regional Commission, that they're ideally situated in a whole lot of ways, not just logistically, but their scope and experience at the level that we're, exactly the level we're working at, yet an administrative orientation that could detract from stuff.
Yeah.
And I feel like avoiding sort of abstract conceptual coordination stuff and actual implementation action as the central emphasis may be our principal challenge.
Here.
So that's certainly got my attention, and I hope that comes through in whatever conversation itself about this.
All right.
Pleasure meeting you all.
Thank you all so much. And I should also just note, Greg came in partway through our meeting. Greg chairs the Conservation Commission here in Newfane, and has coordinated us having the space to meet in last month and this month. And
Had a brain cramp, I don't
yeah,
know why. I thought
yeah, no, not at all.
Again, it was
But
here earlier.
thank you again for
No, it's
making
quite
this
all right, quite all
possible.
right. Glad it worked out.